Yeah, let's begin. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for sticking around after lunch. I know that's prime nap time, but hopefully the food energized you. We have 3 presentations in this next section. So I know in the first section we kind of stuck to 15 minutes for presentation, but if we need to go a little over, I think we have that extra time to kind of have that cushion. So, but let's try to keep it under 20 minutes at least. First, we have Zac Clark, who is a master's candidate in urban and regional planning at the University of California, Los Angeles. Thank you for coming down to San Diego to join us. And he's going to be talking about his work on homelessness. Okay.
All right, well, thank you. It's good to see everyone. And probably half the room is either really tired or the other half is really energized. So excited to get into this. So my name is Zac Clark. I'm a Master's of City Planning student at UCLA. More specifically, I focus on housing and economic development, and I appreciate your time. So I'm going to start with a brief story, if that's okay. So 2 years ago, I launched a program in San Francisco for people experiencing homelessness. And on the 9th day of delivering that program, I met a man named Dave. And our conversation was brief, but as I was walking away, he had called out and he had said, I got a letter in my general mailbox that said that my mother had passed away. Can you see if it's true? And so I took down the name of his sister, found her phone number on the internet, surprisingly, and she didn't answer. But later that evening, I got a call from the family's attorney who said, we've been looking all over for Dave. He had been homeless in Napa County for about 10 years, and more recently moved to San Francisco. And the piece of information that Dave didn't know, which the attorney shared after confirming that Dave's mother had passed away, was that his mother left him $40,000 in an inheritance that he didn't know about. And so I share this story because it illustrates that movement can sometimes present new opportunities, but in the case of Dave's, it was a difference between having access to resources, whether they were known or not. So that story, among many others, prompted me to devote the better half of last year traveling California to try to understand what the determinants of movement are for California's unhoused population. So a little bit of background. So I moved across the country to study at the University of San Francisco in 2019. I studied international business and marketing. Based on my very bland slides, you probably won't believe I studied marketing, but I did. And in 2020, when COVID hit, I was living in a neighborhood called the Tenderloin. And in San Francisco, it's a smaller version of Los Angeles' Skid Row. There's a lot of homelessness, a lot of crime. And so I began talking to people who lived outside my building, and I learned that there were 2 key issues that people who were unsheltered were facing. The one is that they had cell phones, but they couldn't keep them charged. And the other is that their belongings were constantly being stolen or trashed. And so I devoted about a year to developing what we like to think is the last backpack someone who's homeless will ever need. And I've spent the past 3 years building this organization and scaling it to about 30 cities in California. And it's given me an opportunity to visit a lot of places in California and help me realize that the unhoused population is both mobile, but there are also a lot of people who are unhoused outside of our metropolitan areas. Okay, so the primary research question for the project is to understand what are the primary determinants of movement between counties for individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness in rural and suburban California. There's some nice little fancy drawings here kind of alluding to what those other things might be. Things like housing, access to transportation, of course legislation and policy, and even things like the weather. So you might be wondering how many people could this possibly be? So to run you through just kind of a quick breakdown of how I'm getting at the target population of about 10,000 people. So let's start with what we know. There's about 180,000 people who are currently homeless in California. About 2/3 are unsheltered. Another 2/3 are in what I call the big 6 counties. That's San Diego and Los Angeles down south. That's Santa Clara, San Francisco, Alameda, and Sacramento up north. So the remaining 1/3 of our unsheltered homeless population are in the other roughly 52 counties in California. And then lastly, 2 years ago, the University of California, San Francisco published the largest representative study of homelessness in a few decades. And one of the tidbits that I pulled from there is that they found that 25% of people are currently homeless in a county in which they were not last housed. So in other words, they moved. And I've been using that as a proxy to sort of predict how many people might have moved in each county in California. So to kind of share what this could look like in practice, and I say could because I'm not trying to present a causal relationship here, but rather just presenting a phenomenon that's been going on in the past few years. So comparing Sacramento and San Joaquin in 2022 to 2024, typically counties in every 2 years do a homeless point in time count, which is a snapshot of homelessness. And as you can see in Sacramento, between this period, there was a reduction of about 2,700 people who were homeless there. Conversely, San Joaquin, which is in the county just south, there was an increase of about 2,400 people. And so as an immediate reaction, we might say that Sacramento was very effective at getting roughly 2,700 people into housing. Conversely, San Joaquin, what's going on there? 2,400 people fell into homelessness. But I would argue that there's more to the story. And so this is just one of the cases that I've been trying to investigate. Sacramento's point in time count report is over 50 pages, and it doesn't really specify where these 2,600 people went. So that's been something that I've been trying to figure out for this project. And if you didn't think funding was important before this year, we're kind of learning that, of course, government funding is important. That was a note to our current situation in the US. But here's just one example of homelessness funding that's come from state funding, and just one pipeline, which is the encampment resolution funding. So in Sacramento, in these 3 years, they received about 21 million. They've spent about 2 of that. San Joaquin has spent about they received 11 million and spent about 6 million. So you can sort of see that as we're now in 2024, and again, this is just one pipeline of funding, but San Joaquin has significantly less resources than Sacramento, despite their unhoused population nearly doubling. So again, not presenting this as a causal relationship, but rather something that's going on that I think has some links to migration. So as far as the project, photos on the big screen I didn't know they were going to be that big. But so what I'm doing for the project, I'm doing about 60 to 75 semi-structured interviews. I have a visual on the next slide showing how I'm breaking down various counties across California that I'll share with you. Most of the interviews have been set up through local nonprofit and government agency connections, although occasionally no one responds to me. And this was in the city of Jackson in Amador County. On Sunday evening, I had dinner with these 2 gentlemen, and we sat outside in Ace Hardware. So I'd say semi-structured because naturally in this work, some things are less formal than others. And very grateful for my nonprofit organization that we've been able to have incentives like gift cards and Bombas socks for all the participants. So here's a quick breakdown of every county in California. And one thing I failed to mention earlier is that this project is not representative of California, but I'm visiting, or I have visited most places in California. And so as you can see here, in the dark red, these are the big 6 counties that I didn't include. There's also 3 counties that I describe as close proximity to the big 6. So these are Marin, San Mateo, and Contra Costa, right up here close to the Bay Area. And there's public transit in these counties that link them to like San Francisco. And so those were excluded just because there weren't many barriers to travel between counties in the Bay Area. And then there's about 9 counties that have less than 100 people experiencing homelessness in them. So I didn't visit those places, thankfully, because I don't know what's over there, to be honest. So maybe someone's been there, but I think it's just desert. Okay, and then the 3 kind of breakdown of the counties that I did include, what I described as the overlooked. So that's about 22 counties, mostly in Northern California, that have less than 1,000 people experiencing homelessness in them. There's about 13 counties that have between 1,000 and 2,500 people unhoused there, and then there's 5 counties that have greater than 2,500 people. And these ranges have no statistical relevance, just kind of a pick. So yeah. Okay, so how I'm framing the research. The paper that I'll be writing at some point is going to use this framework. So the first bucket is looking at trends and local allocation. So trying to investigate different cases like I presented earlier, San Joaquin and Sacramento, looking at the data and trying to investigate those. And then the second and third buckets tie into the qualitative fieldwork that I've been doing for the interviews. So the first of those 2 buckets is historical movements. So looking at the demographics of the participants, where they were last housed, where they initially became homeless, and all the movements that they've been involved in. And then the third bucket is trying to tie those things together to understand what each of those movements were and what the cause and effects of those movements were. And I pose this question of, is it simply about origin, place, and social networks? And that's a big part of it. So these are some of the initial findings that I've had that I predicted before the project began. And the reality is that family and friends have a huge influence on movements. So, for example, someone that is experiencing homelessness in San Diego County, maybe they have an uncle in Kern County in Bakersfield, and the uncle allows them to stay there for a short period of time. Maybe they have a falling out, and now that person is homeless in Bakersfield. That's kind of a common thread that I've heard quite a bit. And then another are new opportunities, things like housing and employment. So these can be both perceived or confirmed. I met a gentleman a few weeks ago who was homeless in Santa Cruz. He started working on boats in Monterey County, and now he's living in Monterey, saving to be able to find housing in Monterey. So there's a lot of interesting stories here. Weather and environment, these are mostly the northern counties, places that get snow. Surprisingly, there is snow in California. I realized that because I showed up in a t-shirt and it was 28 degrees. So places like Siskiyou County, Mendocino, very northern parts of California where people are camping, essentially. They're in forested areas, and I met a gentleman who had been homeless there for about 3 years in Humboldt County. His winter camping gear kept getting stolen, and he moved to Tehama County in the city of Red Bluff. So, these are the kinds of stories that I'm seeing. And then this photo looks pretty creepy, but I visited the city of Grants Pass. There was a huge Supreme Court case ruling last summer, which gave the ability for localities to now cite and fine people who are unhoused. And so that's had some impact. Primarily our more like conservative communities have started to issue citations and fines. And what I'm seeing here is that the movement is not across counties, but rather it's within counties. So it's more intra-regional within the same city or a neighboring city. Just 2 slides left here. So some of the unpredicted findings are what I would describe as nomadic groups. So these are folks who are from different non-traditional housing backgrounds. Kind of the 2 common demographics within this are veterans, and then also people who were in foster care or might have entered street life at a young age, and the streets are sort of, to be, I'm phrasing this very unprofessionally, but the people have been without traditional housing for a long period of time, and that's sort of all they know. The other thing is that most nonprofits are unaware of their clients' backgrounds. So many times I've left interviews and the executive director of that organization has said, how did this gentleman how did they come to Yolo County from Illinois? That was a case that I spoke to. And so many nonprofits don't know what causes movement and where even people came from. So that was an interesting kind of small finding. And then the last thing I would say, which I was very surprised at this, is that these 4 counties here, Del Norte, Humboldt, Siskiyou, and Mendocino, are way north. And when you look at the point in time count data, they actually have more people who are unsheltered than our metropolitan areas when you take into account adjusting for the general population. And I think that's something that not a lot of people realize. I could talk about it for a while, but since I only have a few minutes, I'll leave it at that. But very interesting, because these places, people are often in very forested areas, and there's very limited resources in these counties as well. So, all right. So wrapping up here, some of the next steps. I still have to visit San Bernardino and Riverside, which I'm doing next week. The data will be all analyzed through software in April. I'm presenting at UCLA, hopefully publishing the paper and then graduating. So that's still, I guess, to be determined. I didn't know how many people would be here, so I brought a few copies of the proposal. We can start the bidding at, yeah, my name is Zac Clark, and I appreciate your time.